Hi there. So this video is to assist you with the essay for social anthropology theory. So if you need advice on the critical reading report or on the quizzes, then scroll up or above me. And if you want to have a look at individual videos relating to each individual question, then scroll down there below me. At least they will be for week 4 on. So if you're looking at this before week 4, they won't be there yet. So that's the first note really to make. The essay questions are going to be posted around week 4. And the reason I don't post them right at the beginning of the semester is actually I don't want you to be thinking about them straight off the bat. So I want you to be getting into the lecture, getting into the literature, and then start to sort of think about the different questions that you might address. Okay. So a quick reminder here then, you only need to answer one question for your essay, so pick any one of those essay titles and address that title. So that's very important. You need to really read the title and ask yourself, what is this question asking me to do? And that's why the videos below me are particularly useful, because I'm not in these videos going to tell you how to answer the question. I'm certainly not going to tell you the answer to the question, right? That would be giving it away. But what I am going to tell you, or help work through with you, is what the question is asking you to do. And that's really a fundamental kind of starting point, because we do get essays, of course, not unoften, where a student unfortunately has not read the question properly and has misunderstood it. And therefore you might get an essay that perhaps is quite a reasonable essay, possibly, but it's not addressing the question. And that really restricts, very substantially, the potential mark that we can give. So really begin with asking yourself, what is this question asking me to do? And go and have a look at those videos below me to help you understand what it's asking you to do. Okay, so that's stage 1. Next then, let's have a think about deadlines and so on. So the essay is due in week 12, Friday, 1 p.m. Okay. Now you notice that we always put these deadlines at 1 p.m. That's just in case there are any technical issues or IT problems or anything like that. So it's time to sort of sort these things out. But these you do need to make sure that you turn it in by that deadline. Have a look if you've got any doubts at the criteria for mitigating circumstances and so on there. Those are very strict, they are very tight. So do make sure you're really aware of what the rules are in that regard. Okay. So the essay in terms of length is 2,000 words, and in terms of the contribution it makes to your overall grade, well, it's 60% of your overall grade. And you need to make sure that you stay within that word count. I'm quite happy for a sort of 10% leeway. So, if it pushes up to 2,150, 2,200, okay. That doesn't include references, by the way. References are separate, so that's just the main body of the text. If you're not quite hitting 2,000, that's okay, as long as you're sort of within roughly 1,800 words. If you're getting below that, well, then I have to deduct marks, because really you haven't written to the length. And if you're going above that, then I have to sort of cut it off, right? I have to say, well, again, it says it's gone on too long, so I have to sort of either cut some of that out effectively and ignore that part, or say, well, I'm going to have to give a penalty here for length. So do make sure that you stick to length. Within that, as I say, some 10% margin to give you a bit of an agreement. Okay. Let's move on then to thinking about the main criteria for the essay. Oh, sorry, before I do, I should just say regarding the deadline, be very conscious here that you're going to have quite a lot of deadlines in week 12, okay? So don't leave this essay to the last minute. More to the point, think already now, assuming you're watching this video at the beginning of the semester, or fairly early in the semester, hopefully you are. If you're watching this on Thursday of week 12, well, it could be too late to do any of the things I suggest now. What I ask you to do then is to really think about how you're going to schedule your own management of different essay deadlines. So, for example, be very conscious that for those of you who sit in Anthropology of India, unfortunately the semester doesn't always happen, but sometimes it does, you have an essay deadline on the same day. So you're going to need to think about, well, maybe I need to submit one of those earlier, and I would actually suggest submitting it so you've cleared it, and then I'm going to give myself time to work on the other one. So that's the kind of, the kind of ways in which you need to be thinking about things. You'll notice also at the beginning of week 12, on Monday, there is a revision session. Okay. Now, it's very tempting, and we do see it as a sort of general pattern amongst students that come week 12, attendance drops off quite substantially. In fact, perhaps it drops off a bit before that, because students are thinking about assessments or are busy trying to sort of write and meet deadlines and so on and so on. Here's something I'll say to you categorically. Do not miss the Monday session on week 12. It is possibly actually the most important lecture of the entire semester. And remember, when you get that lecture, you've still got a good 4 days before the deadline. And that lecture is really going to give you a very broad overview. And I think for your essays, that's going to be really critical, because what I'm going to be looking for, amongst other things, is to see that you've understood how this question flows into the sort of patterns of emergences of theory and so on and so on. And that's really, really critical. And to get that, attending that final lecture will really help you pull those threads together. It's so critical. Do not miss it. Do not miss it. Do not miss it. Okay. Right. If there are any changes to the deadline, that will be posted to you by email, and it will also be posted on Moodle. But otherwise, assume, as per details, that your deadline is week 12, Friday, 1 p.m. Okay. Right. Let's then have a think about some of the more particulars within the essay. Now, I mentioned there that the revision session will be sort of giving you this big overview. And the reason why that's sort of so important for these particular essay questions is that you'll notice as you start through the questions that none of them really relate to a particular week per se. So there are different types of questions in there. Some questions might pick up a particular theme, an ethnographic kind of core theme or something like that, something that's discussed quite a lot through different bits of anthropological literature and so on, and ask you to think about the ways in which that theme is approached from different theoretical positionalities, and so on, and what the debates are there, etc., etc. Well, that's not about 1 week, right? That's about really pulling a thread across many different theoretical approaches to draw together an essay that engages with those different approaches. Now, you might not get every single one in there. Okay, that's okay. You might not get, we have sort of 11, 10 actually different sort of topic weeks. You might not get every single sort of theoretical approach in there, but we would want to see that you've certainly understood how those different sort of ideas interact, how they engage with each other, and what the different sort of perspectives are. Which weeks you engage with really depends a little bit on how you set up your arguments, and that is something I'll come to in a moment. You might also get a question that's what I sort of term a tracing question. So perhaps it asks you to trace the emergence and impact of a particular theoretical approach within anthropology. Well, again, here, you cannot limit your engagement to just 1 week. It might be tempting with that one, because you think, oh, well, it's one on Marxism, it's one on constructionism, it's one on active network, so I'm just going to look at that week. Well, no, because you have to understand, to answer that question, remember, that I'm asking you to detail how that particular theory emerges. Well, of course, that's emerged from the theory that's come before, and that it's in discourse with, so you need to understand what's come before, and how that particular sort of theoretical perspective impacts upon anthropology. Well, again, then that's moving you forward, and perhaps that particular sort of turn within theory begets some other sort of bodies of theoretical work, which are somewhat different again. So you need to make sure that it's not just restricting yourself to 1 week. So those are sort of examples of some of the questions that you might get in there. There are a few other sort of ways of situating them as well, but certainly none of the questions are going to do. You're not going to do well on any of those questions if you limit your engagement to the slides and literature from a single week. Okay, so very, very important. Okay, let's have a look then at the criteria that I'm going to be using as a marker. And this then really takes you, so if you're looking at this on Moodle, you'll need to go into the other section that says assessment support, or assessment information, sorry, and scroll down that page until you get to a grid. If you're looking at the course handbook, then you'll find the grid on page 42. So in either case, you'll see that there's a marking sort of rubric, as we call it, that we use to mark all our essays in the social anthropology side of things anyway. The biological one does a little bit different because there's a lot of criteria. But you'll see here there's a variety of factors I'm concerned with. So let's just go through these in brief. So first of all, factual knowledge. Well, You need to show me that you've understood the material. You need to show me that you've read the material. You need to show me that you're accurate in your interpretation of the material. And on that note, really, how do you do that? Well, you need to set aside plenty of time to read. Really plenty of time to read. For an essay of this length, I would suggest, frankly, reading for a week before you put pen to paper or finger to keyboard and begin writing that piece. Give yourself the time to familiarise yourself with the literature. Give yourself the time to think about, well, where are the debates here? Where are the contestations? What's going on? How do these different things fit together? And then how do I address the particular question that I'm focusing on? As I've said already, be very careful to make sure you do answer the question. Second category here, awareness of scholarly opinion. So that's really sort of tying into the first. It's showing that you understand that the different debates, the different ways of conceiving things, the different issues, the different opinions, and so on. Expression of arguments, number 3. And this is really key, and this is one where a lot of students fall down. What we get quite often are essays that start with a line that reads perhaps a little bit like, this essay will discuss the debates concerning kinship, let's take kinship because it's a very broad term, concerning kinship within anthropology. Well, here straight away you've got a problem, because what you've done there is you've not posed an argument. You've simply told us what the essay is going to discuss. That's not taking a position. What you need to do to shape an argument is right in that introductory paragraph, hit us with the argument the essay is going to make straight up front. So how might we rephrase that to look more like an argument? Well, instead of saying this essay discusses, let's start with a line that leads us into an argument, right? So that might be, for example, something like, this essay argues that, ... This essay contends that, ... In addressing debates around kinship, this essay takes the position that, or this essay argues that, or whatever, however you might put that together. But really important to have that sort of line at the opening. Now, you're not done yet, because what we do get sometimes is an essay that says, this essay argues that it's useful to discuss the literature on kinship. Well, that's still not an argument. Okay? That's just, again, going back to saying what the essay will do. You need to take a position there. Okay? So let's say, for example, you might argue, for example, and there are no questions, as you'll notice, on kinship below me, so this is sort of a good case to use to not give too much away. But you might argue, for example, this essay argues that the study of kinship has been far too dominant within anthropology, and we need to, and more recent anthropological work that deconstructs kinship is extremely important for moving us to a more relatedness-based understanding. Right, now, what you've done there is you've framed an argument. Okay? You've set up an argument and you said, this is what the essay is going to argue. Now that's really sort of a very significant first part of your introduction. What you also need to do in that sort of little introductory paragraph is also just lay down a few markers for us. Show us how you're going to do that. So the essay is going to illustrate the argument being made, or this is illustrated through an engagement with ethnographic examples from X, Y, and Z, and with the debates around structuralism, post-structuralism, or whatever you might do, or however you might frame that. So that's really the kind of introductory paragraph that we're aiming for there. Then you have your sort of main body of text, and here is where you're going to show that factual knowledge, show that awareness of the different opinions, and follow that argument through. Yeah, so that argument's got to be followed through the text. It's no good having a piece of text then that says it's going to argue something at the beginning, but then actually just sort of meanders through the literature and doesn't really bring that literature together to take a cohesive point. When you're doing an A-level, as many of you will have finished probably about a little over a year and a half ago now, you are often told to have a balanced argument, right, 50-50. And maybe in your conclusion, you might take an opinion. Well, we're actually trying to invert that at this level, right? Now we want you to take a position, and we're not expecting you to have a balanced argument. We're not expecting you to say, 50% say this and 50% say that. We're expecting you to argue and evidence, right, your position. Now, you would evidence with an engagement with the theoretical literature, but also, of course, in this case, with ethnography as well. Bring in ethnographic cases to help illustrate the argument you're making. And here you can draw on other modules. You can draw on ethnographies that you've engaged in with other modules, as long as you're not plagiarizing, of course, text that you might have written elsewhere, because our system will pick that up. And I'll come to plagiarism a little bit more later. So feel free to draw in other ethnographic material. Do your own literature searches, right? Use Google Scholar, use the library system to find additional literature. So, kinship, theory, anthropology, what happens if I put in those keywords? What kind of pieces do I get? Well, some of them might be very theoretical pieces, right, which you might find extremely useful. But some of the pieces of literature might be much more ethnographic. Well, maybe there you can actually use some ethnographic case studies to illustrate the theoretical arguments you're making. At the core of anthropology is that relationship between theory and description. So for the essays, you'll notice there that the questions are always asking you to utilize both theoretical material and ethnographic examples. Okay, so make sure that you're bringing in ethnography as well as theory. Pretty much every piece of ethnography you use will use theory in it as well. But by ethnography, we mean that sort of descriptive context. This sort of understanding of kinship is illustrated through Schneider's engagement with kinship in the US, where he argues that X, Y, and Z, and shows this through the ethnographic material. Okay. So structure then. We've talked about that quite a lot already. Introduction, main body, but then of course you do need a conclusion at the end as well. And that conclusion really isn't adding anything new, right? You don't want to introduce anything new in the conclusion. It will be quite short, probably just a paragraph, short paragraph even, in an essay of this length. But it's where you're tying up those loose ends. Reminding us where we've been. So, in the context of kinship then, this essay has illustrated X, Y, and Z, right? It's kind of reiterating that again. So just to tie off those loose ends. You don't have to put in fact I wouldn't suggest you put in that sort of A-level sentence where you say, ooh, future research I might, or future studies I might. Don't worry about that. Tie things off neatly, like a bow, we're done. Okay. Then you also need to make sure, of course, there's a bibliography in there as well, and I'll come to the bibliography when I talk about referencing in a minute. We have then as the next category here, critical judgment. And again, these categories are starting to intermingle a little bit here, because really what we're asking you to do there is to turn on your own critical faculties. And an illustration of that really is to show that you're able to build an argument, that you're able to do more than just review some literature and talk about what they say, that you're able actually to build an argument. Presentation, well, these then cover your sort of core areas. Is it clearly written? Spelling, grammar, etc. Is that clear? And that's where it's really, really important to take the time to edit and proofread the piece. Now, of course, if you do have a dyslexia, evidence of that attached to your student profile and so on, then we do mark these essays slightly differently. But even though there are some limitations as to how far we can go with that, so for example, if we can't understand what's being said, well, then we can't mark it, okay? We do give allowance, of course, for errors with spelling, grammar, etc. But, and I say this as a dyslexic myself, by the way, that doesn't mean you shouldn't proofread, and that doesn't mean that you shouldn't edit. That process is still extremely important because it will bring that piece up. So don't see it as sort of that it negates that. It really, really doesn't. Okay, so finally, then let's talk about referencing. And this is so important. I know I rambled on about it quite a lot in the video above me regarding the critical reading report. But it matters so much. Please make sure you take the time to understand the Harvard referencing system. There is a link on this page. Look at it, understand it, make sure you follow it accurately. You will lose big marks, potentially, if you don't reference correctly. As I said in the other video, I might get a perfect essay, wonderful, fantastic argument, wonderful knowledge, but the referencing is lazy or the referencing isn't done properly, or it's not done in the correct style, well then actually I'm limited to a 59 in terms of your overall mark. So think about how much you might lose there. Potentially a first class essay becomes a 59 because the bibliography is a mess, or because it's incomplete, or because the in-text referencing isn't done correctly. These things really matter. Be very, very careful with quotations. Make sure your quotations are in quotation marks, okay? And that you include then name of author, year, and page number afterwards. If it's a quote, you must have the page number. Page numbers aren't needed if you're writing in your own words. Then you can just put the author and the year. Okay? Make sure you reference them fully, of course, that piece in the bibliography. Okay, so I'm not going to take you through that sort of take your hand through that, you need to go and have a look at the detailed information that's available for you there on the Harvard referencing system. Really, all I'm going to say is make sure you do that because it really, really does matter, and you could potentially lose a lot of marks if you do not. Okay, I think that pretty much then covers the bulk of a sort of overview video of the essay for social anthropology theory. Make sure. Oh no, I have one final note, and I'm saying this because it has happened at least twice, and in my previous post a few times as well to students. 2 points here. 1, make sure you submit the correct document. Okay? Absolutely critical. So when you finish up that document, big bold letters, final version, or essay final version, because what I have had in the past, for example, is a student submitting notes in error, or a student in one case submitting a completely blank page. So make sure you're not submitting a picture of your cat or something. Make sure it is the correct document. I can only mark what's in front of me. And here's the other point. Once that deadline's passed, you can't change it. Right? You're not allowed to change it. Not under any circumstances. So make sure that you're doing that. And finally then, my last point of the day, plagiarism. Basically, really, just don't do it. We will pick it up. 100%. Doesn't matter if you try and change words around, if you try and juggle things about. If you copy a Wikipedia page or someone else's work, we will pick it up. Very often we can see it in the text. You can see it because the flow of the text, the way the text is written changes and shifts. You think, oh, this isn't the same voice talking to us anymore. What's happened there? And aside from that, of course, we have the Turnitin system, which is an extremely powerful plagiarism checker. So do not commit plagiarism. There are scales within that, and sort of, a small amount of accidental plagiarism, we probably just deduct some marks. But if you're intentionally plagiarizing, well, then potentially, worst case scenario, you actually get asked to leave the university. So it is something very, very serious that's taken very, very seriously. Okay, so don't plagiarize, but enjoy the essay. I think this is a wonderful thing to do. As you probably noticed, I'm quite enthusiastic about theory. It is something extremely exciting. It is something that's at the core of our discipline, and actually, I would argue, can fundamentally change the way in which we see and experience the world around us. And that's an incredible thing. So have a lot of fun with it, and I'll see you on the other side. Don't forget your feedback, of course, will be available on Turnitin. And make sure you look at that feedback and use it for your essays next semester. All the best. Bye.